Welcome everybody to my kitchen and to today's class, the single grain, single flour sourdough, gluten-free sourdough boule. I am super excited to teach that because sometimes baking gluten-free sourdough can be overwhelming with a lot of different flours, and to introduce you to a simpler way is really my honor and my pleasure. And it's also a very special day, so it was nice to actually combine both events, because if you have been baking with me in the past, you know about my long-term dream of having a gluten-free sourdough baking community. And last night, just before dinner, I turned it live, so it is live. And you also know that I'm German, I'm a straight shooter, so I tell you what's ahead of us. Besides me asking you a couple of questions, and I know the answer from some of you already, but for anybody that I don't know personally, I would love to know. Then I'll talk a little bit about who I am, why we do a single flour bread. Then I want to share with you a little bit what makes today so special. And then we're going to do the demo, and it's going to be a full class. So not like some other people that give you the carrot and then it's like, okay, you guys got to figure it out on your own. I'm going to tell you how we make it. And then a little bit more of what's to come about the community. And then if we have some time left, let's do a Q&A at the end about the bread, about the community, about anything that you may want to know. So before we dive in, I would love for you to head into the chat and tell me with a 0 if you have no starter, have never baked with gluten-free sourdough, put into the chat a 0. If you have a starter, but really don't know how to bake with it or have baked with it very little, put in a 1. But if you have been working that starter really hard, put in a 2. Let me know what you have done. And that's all sourdough, gluten-free sourdough. So not regular wheat-based sourdough. So we have a lot of 1s and 2s. Awesome. Concerned about the health of the starter? Oh, I hope not kaput. All right. Good. Thank you, everybody, so much. So why do we want to do a single flour bread? You've all made gluten-free sourdough bread before, and usually you have like a whole basket full of different flours. And all of these flours have a purpose. The grains mixed together give you a specific flavor profile and crumb and crust. And the starches that are in there is to help the bread rise. We are very used to having fluffy kind of bread. And if we would not put in the starches, our breads would be very dense. And because all of our baking and all of our taste buds over centuries have been programmed, if you will, to expect one certain thing, and that is around baking with wheat flour. And wheat is very unique in its ability to have both the starches and the proteins to give us that baked good that we are used to. Now, if you take out the gluten and you want to recreate what you're used to, you got to mix things, right? So to actually do that without having to have a full basket of flour is a challenge. So you need to find a flour that is similar to wheat in baking, that behaves kind of the same thing. So I can tell you right now, oat flour isn't it. You can't create a single flour bread with oat flour. So later on, I'll tell you what works and show you how to actually make that bread. It will be a little bit of a denser bread because we are purposely not putting in all the starch to make it rise. And I think it will be an easy way for people to step into sourdough, gluten-free sourdough baking if they are overwhelmed with that whole basket of flour. It has its place, but we can do it simpler, especially, and I know I'm not the only one, at the end of a long day, when there is no bread in the house and your spouse says, do you have any bread? And you're like, oh God, now I have to start. Just using one flour is so much easier than having to mix. All right. If you know me, you know that I've been a baker for a long time. I grew up in Germany. I was raised by my grandmother. I know it sounds like a cliche, but it's actually true. I spent a lot of time with her in her kitchen, and I learned from her and my aunt baking. My aunt was an incredible baker. She could have had a bakery, but she was a home baker. She made the fanciest torts and cakes. There was always at least two in her house when we went to visit. So I learned from very early on how to bake, and I felt very comfortable with it. But then things changed. I came to the US. I no longer had the sourdough bread that I was accustomed to. So I started baking regular sourdough bread. And then I became gluten intolerant. And then I stopped baking for a while, at least bread baking. Always kind of baked cakes on the side. And what I started to do was translate all those recipes that I got from my family into gluten-free versions. And having been in my former life, in my former career, a research scientist, I looked at it very scientifically. How can we do that? How can we have a sourdough made out of gluten-free flour? What drives those bacteria so you can have just a viable, great bread when you don't use wheat? So what I've seen is a lot of people start with a mindset of, oh, let's just make what we do with wheat gluten-free. But it doesn't kind of work that way because we are now taking out gluten. So we have a different microbiome, a different living entity, which is your starter. So I looked at it from a different perspective. Eventually developed the gluten-free sourdough starter, started baking, and the rest is history. But I always said to my friends, I want community. I long to bake with others. And I, until about 2 years ago, didn't understand what it was. And then my mother gave me a gift. I shared to her that I'm teaching gluten-free sourdough baking, that the cohorts that come together, we're always sad at the end. I wished I had a community. She walks off and she brings me something. And she brings me this. And this is the bread basket that my grandmother on my mother's side had. So before I was telling you about my grandmother on my father's side, this is my mom's side. She said, this is the basket that your grandmother used to bake. She made it from straw from her farm. But here's the cool thing. She said, you know that they baked once a month in the town hearth, all the women baked together. And when I heard that, it was, now I understand why I want community. It's this coming together as a group of people doing one thing and supporting each other. So I thought that would be really cool for you to see that, no, I don't use that to bake in because it's actually quite big and it's a lot of bread. But it's so special to have that. So I wanted to share that. All right, so that goes with the start of the community. As I mentioned, I turned live the community last night. We did a beta group. Some people went through it as a beta, and now it's kind of open for everybody to come in, where we bake together. It's a baking community with recipes, with support, and I'll show some stuff later on. But it's something that I feel like it came through my lineage. God, now I'm getting emotional. I can't believe this. It's something that came through me, through my grandmothers, my great-grandmothers. It's something that didn't understand why I had this drive. And yet it's like a dream come true that we are here together again, baking online, and that I can invite you into a community to continue to do that. So that's what makes today special. All right, enough. Thank you. Thank you, Gata. Etana, I'm so grateful. So I think I've talked enough about all of that and the background and why today is special on so many levels. Let's bake bread together, right? That's why we're all here. I promised you I'm not going to shortchange you. every class I teach, I start with a grounding, because I learned when I am in my kitchen, it gives me a place to be creative, and it gives me a place to ground in. And when I say, guys, I'm so sorry. All right, I'll tell you something else. Remember the aunt that I told you about? She passed away 2 days ago. And today is her wake. And I'm here in the US and she's in Germany and my family is there. And I don't want to reschedule, but I am here with all of you. I feel like I am passing that baton that was passed to me onto everybody else. So forgive me if I'm a little teary-eyed. I'll get myself together. Every time I teach a class, I find that when I am grounded in the moment, it resets my nervous system. So we start baking with a little bit of an exercise to be present where our feet are. My feet are here barefoot in the kitchen to ground in with Mother Nature. I'm going to invite you, if you can, to stand up, to put your hand, one hand on your belly, one hand on your heart, and let's breathe together. Just 3 breaths in. Take a big breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And let those shoulders drop. Let's take another breath in and out through your mouth. And now take that moment of stillness and check in with your body. Where are you holding tension? Is it in your neck or in your chest? Do you feel like your legs are tight and your toes are gripped? Go and shake it out a little bit. You can wiggle. Nobody judges. This is a safe zone. Just be yourself. When you find your center and balance again, let's take one more breath in together through your nose. And out your mouth. All right. I hope you're all feeling good and feeling here in the moment. So let's bake together. If you are not baking using a digital scale, I highly, highly recommend doing it, because with cups and spoons and all those measures, you can never really get your bread, your recipes repeatable. It's not accurate enough. So please try to get into the habit to measure your ingredients. I will share both the grams and the cups to help you along. But if you are not used to working in grams, I really, really recommend you do that. So you can make this bread in a KitchenAid if you have one, or you can make it by hand. Today, I'm going to make it by hand. Oh, I'm so sorry here. I'm still dripping. All right. I'm going to put on some gloves because I just wiped my face. So I mentioned earlier that you can't make a single flour bread with any flour. You need to have a flour that has both the right amount of starch and the right amount of protein. The starch gives it the lift. The protein gives it, well, the nutrition part of it, the density, the mouthfeel. So oat flour is not one that, for example, would work. It's way too heavy. And I teach a in-depth alchemy of flour course that is in the community. But for today, just know that some flours are very light, like an amaranth is a very light flour. Oat happens to be a very heavy flour. We are working today with buckwheat. So buckwheat, you might think, is actually a very dense, heavy flour, but there are different types of buckwheat out there. I am using today the Anthony's organic buckwheat. It doesn't say light on it, but out of experience, I found that this is a lot lighter than, for example, the Bob's buckwheat flour. Bob's buckwheat tends to be very, very heavy. And with this said, I have absolutely no affiliations with the flour that we are using, or the brand, but there are differences in brands. So I happen to like Anthony's because they have always been consistently good. Bob's red mill is a hit or miss. There are some flours I love, some flours that are very heavy or dense or difficult to use in gluten-free baking. So you definitely, if you want to do a buckwheat, don't buy the Bob's red mill. So we'll take 400 grams of the light buckwheat. And today I measured it already, so you don't have to watch me measure. Then we are adding 12 grams of xanthan gum. Very quickly, if you haven't heard it, you can either use xanthan gum or psyllium husk. I personally prefer the xanthan gum because it doesn't go stale as fast as a psyllium husk does. It doesn't make a dough even more dense. The xanthan gum gives it more of a lightness, more of an airiness. And if you have digestive issues, with a lot of people that are gluten-free, they really struggle with the fiber of what is psyllium husk. So usually I find xanthan gum is easier to tolerate than psyllium husk, but you can do either one. So a rule of thumb is if we have, let's say, 10 grams of xanthan gum, 20 grams of psyllium husk. So it's a 1-to-2 exchange on a recipe. So I'm going to use xanthan gum today. I'll just add that. Then we're gonna go with salt. And the salt is either 10 grams or 1.5 teaspoons. So I'm going to add 1.5 teaspoons. And then something else that I like to add to this bread, because it is just one flour, is coriander. And I crush the coriander in mortar and pestle. You can, with a mortar and pestle, you can also use a spice grinder. If you have coriander ground already, it works as well. Coriander is a carminative, which means it helps the body digest. And it is a spice that is very often used in traditional sourdough bread, wheat or not, in Europe. So it helps the body to digest the bread. So one is the sourdough that pre-ferments it and helps with digestion. Then we traditionally add carminative spices like coriander to help even further digest and pass it through the digestive system. So it stimulates motility in your gut, and it gives this very yummy flavor to it. So these are all the dry ingredients, really. The one flour, in this case, we're using the buckwheat, xanthan gum or psyllium husk, salt, and then the coriander that I like in there. You just basically mix it up. Take this off the scale because I have today pre-measured for you, and I'm going to. So here I just mixed it up. Let's add 450 grams of water. We don't use anything else, any other liquids other than water. No oils or any of that. It's all not necessary. It's really just stripped down. And today I'm going to bake with Hugo. Some of you know Hugo. He's a millet starter. I also have Agnes and Hildegard that are brown rice flour starters. But I've kind of neglected Hugo a little bit in the refrigerator over the last couple of weeks. I got the ladies more of a chance to bake, so I thought I'll bring out Hugo for you today. we are taking 100 grams of starter. So anytime you take out your starter, smell it, make sure that it smells good, has this pleasant sour tang. There's nothing growing on it because it does happen. And stir it up. If there's, there shouldn't be any hooch on it because it's activated. I fed Hugo this morning, but if there is, always mix in your hooch. Don't pour it out. So we're taking 100 grams of your starter. Right. And that is really everything that went in. It's super easy. So the flour, the binder, the seasoning, water, and starter. And you can just easily mix that up with a rubber spatula. I use just a silicone one because I don't want to get my hand all gooky, very scientific term here for everyone. But you can just put on gloves if you want and mix it up. So you will see that the dough, when you use the xanthan gum, is actually a lot more liquid than it will be with psyllium husk. And I prepared a dough that is ready or close to ready to baking, so you can see what it looks like after it has fermented. And you can see the difference between a xanthan gum dough and a psyllium husk dough. Because, as I said, xanthan gum is a lot looser, it's a lot more liquid. And if somebody comes from the school of psyllium husk, the first question I get is there something wrong with my starter or with my dough? It's so liquid. No, it's totally normal. Now what you do is you take your spatula, you go on the outside, press in the dough, and then you can just use your spatula to knead a dough as if you would with your hands. Or if you run it in the KitchenAid, you just use a dough hook. Makes it super easy. So it's not as velvety as if I would use the KitchenAid, but it should have a nice velvety consistency. I'm going to show it to you in just a second. I hope you can see that. I'm going to hold it so it's really a smooth dough. That's what you're going for. And then let's get it ready for fermentation. Here's what I do. I take a dish towel, because you don't really need fancy baskets or you know, all sorts of paraphernalia. You can do that really, really simply. I lay out my dish towel, grab some brown rice flour, and now make a circle on my linen or cotton dish towel. And you want something with a fine weave, so you don't have a pattern or a terry cloth or something like that. Something very thin, very fine. I'm actually using dish towels that I got from my grandma, you know, at the time when a girl needed to have her linen chest before she gets married. My grandmother made sure that I was well endowed with dish towels, that is. All right, so you have your circle here. You take your dough, put it right here in the middle, move it out a little bit, and then we'll wrap it in this dish towel. And I like to use the edges to cover my boule with flour. And then take my 4 corners. Some of you have seen that. Pull them together, kind of like a stork's basket. I don't know why I think about that every time I do that. And then you can use a baking bowl. As I said, it doesn't have to be fancy. This is a small 7-inch baking bowl. I shape my dough, put it in. So here we are. Smooth it out a little bit so I have a nice bottom here, because that's the top is going to be the bottom. We'll cover it up, and then I put it in just a shopping bag, literally. This is the dough that I made ahead of time to show you what it will look like when it's fermented. So I have one of those pretty wicker baskets because I just had to have one, no need for it really. And I take this one, put it back in the bowl, in the bag, sorry. And now let's see, it is quite warm in my kitchen right now. It's almost 77 with the oven going in the background. It's probably going to take about 5 hours for it to rise. It has taken up to 7 or 8 hours for me. The kitchen has been lately cold. You know, the rise time, the fermentation time is dependent on your ambient temperature, on the temperature of your kitchen. As it gets colder, our breads will take longer to ferment. So let's see what it looks like. It was a little slow, and it is still a little slow. So I'm gonna pick this up. This dough needs probably another 2 hours. It was 70 this morning when I made the dough. I would expect it to come up of the basket maybe this much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to score it, but I think at the end I may put it back in the basket and give it another 2 hours, because this will make a very dense bread. And you never know. When I was baking, when did I bake last? 2 days ago, it was still a lot warmer in the kitchen. So it really depends. And you need to feel the dough. That's something that my grandmother always said, feel the dough and not so much go by the numbers. So let me show you how we would score it. I'll take a piece of parchment paper, put it on top, flip it over. Then you can take your basket away, or your bowl, whatever you're using, and your dish towel. And I still like to score with a razor blade. I have a lamb, I have a sharp knife. I have done it with, you know, the artist knives. I still come back to a simple razor blade. If that's your preferable tool to score, I think it works beautifully, but you just have to be careful, obviously. So let's do kind of like a sunflower pattern today. I just feel like we need a little bit of sunshine today. All right, maybe we'll put one more here. Yeah, this dough is very dense, so it will go back to ferment a little bit longer. Why are we scoring bread? A, it gives us a beautiful design, but it also helps the dough open up. If we would not score bread, it would keep the crust together, but you want an open crumb, you want oven spring. So now you're fighting against the somewhat drier crust. It would eventually start to crack. And in some breads, you kind of want that type of crust, but that bread is designed to be a little bit denser. The recipe is designed for that. If we don't do it with a bread like this, our crumb would be denser and it would just crack. So to support that oven spring, we want to at least have one deeper cut in there, about 1/2 inch, if you will. But everything else, you can be as creative as you want. So obviously, I'm not going to put it in my Dutch oven right now. That's about ready to hold the bread. I'm going to actually just put it back in the basket and let it ferment a little bit longer. Exactly the opposite of what I did before. This little bread is going to ferment a little longer. All right. And maybe I'll take a picture so you can see later on what it looks like. So let's talk a little bit about the community, and then we'll answer some questions later. I'm going to share my screen so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, why? Here we go. All right, can you all see my screen? Okay. Heidi, can you give me a thumbs up? Can you see the screen? Okay, awesome. So this is the gluten-free sourdough community that I mentioned before. I was struggling with where to host a community, where to bring people together. And I wasn't a big fan of social media to host it in a Facebook group or wherever. I wanted to recreate that community feel that we had, or that my grandmothers had, baking together, where you have a task, where you learn together, but you can also have side conversations. So this is on a private platform. It's called the Gluten-free Sourdough Lab. This is actually not the link for it, Heidi, if you want to drop it in to learn a little bit more. But there is the community space where you have areas on sharing your wins, asking for help, having conversations about other topics. So for example, we just added an egg substitutions guide. Here is somebody sharing how their bread is going, somebody else sharing more breads, cakes, something I made with my mom to see if people were interested in an apple strudel class. So it is a community that has the community space, but it also has the courses space. If you don't have a sourdough starter, you can learn how to make a sourdough starter. If you want to learn more breads and pizzas and bagels and all of that, that is in the bread and discard creations. So both of them go together, but they are defined in different spaces because bread is just bread. And then the discard creations is all about cakes and cookies and waffles and scones and crackers and things like that. So that is the space that we are talking about. And as I mentioned before, you get to have, like here in the ask for help will be, how do I feed my starter going forward? This person had an issue, or I'm going on vacation, how do I feed it, or anything else. A lot of questions we had when we first designed or created our starter was, does it look right? Can you take a look at it? So that is sort of the space that we are opening for people to come in. We're doing 2 recipes a month. So one is a bread, one is a discard recipe, because if you bake, you always have discard. These are all recipes from my family that I translated, that I created into a gluten-free version. We have live classes like the one here today. In 2 weeks, we are doing a fire cider making class. I just completed my level 1 herbalist course. So I'm super excited to bring more herbs into the teaching, but my actual herbalist teacher is coming in to show and, make with us fire cider for the winter. So that's one of the things that are coming up. We're doing banana bread in October, besides the two recipes, and all the conversations. Like we've had conversations on how do you can tuna fish? If you don't want to eat tuna fish out of a can. So things like that were on the table, or anything like how do I work it into my day with kids? Anything that people felt like they needed answers, and it might be interesting to other members in the community. Heidi, anything on your end that we should talk about that I may have forgotten?
Hi there. So couple of questions. How much coriander did you add?
I added 2 teaspoons.
Two
It's
teaspoons.
fresh coriander, freshly dried, because when you ground coriander or any of those spices, you're losing a lot of the oils, volatile oils get very quickly destroyed when they are exposed to oxygen. So I like to crush them fresh or mill them fresh in my spice grounder. So I take 2 teaspoons, crush it or grind it, and then that's how much I added.
Okay, and how much water?
That was 450 grams.
450 grams. And then the cook time and the temperature, is that the same as your others, 475 for 30 and then 450?
We are doing this one a little lower at temperature. We're starting at 450 for half an hour, and then we're taking the lid off and finishing up anywhere between 25 and 30 minutes. So it's a total time of about 55 to 60 minutes. It depends on how well your oven does, how hot it runs or how cool. So you're going for a 210 Fahrenheit internal temperature.
And leaving it at 450 for the full 55 minutes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Same thing.
Okay.
All the way to
Those were the specific questions there. And then one question, does it matter if you use a brown rice or a millet? I said no, both work for that.
Yep.
That is correct. And then the only other question or thing, Lindy was saying that her bread never rises. It comes out flat and dense, but yummy. And so I wanted to reply with some questions for her, but I didn't want to take her attention away from the class. So I just thought I'd let you sort of troubleshoot with her for a bit if you have some
Okay.
ideas that might support that.
Yeah, that is a typical question that we would get in the community, where it's like, I'm following the recipe, but why is it not working? Is your starter rising properly when you feed it? How long does it take? You can unmute yourself if you want.
Well, yeah, I think my starter rises really lovely. Like sometimes it will double or more, or like half an inch, maybe in about 3 or 4 hours, and I feed it. But there's 2 things that I problem solved on my own from what you've shared with us today. Is one, I use psyllium, not the xanthan, so that could be part of it. And also, my house is always really cold. And I took the course from you in October, and I've been baking through the winter, and I just like our house is like 66, 68. I'll put it by a window, I'll do anything, but it probably never gets warm enough to really do a rise, is my thought, because I have a digital scale. Like I weigh everything meticulously. I have organic grains. I use distilled water. Like for me, I'm not like, I cook by opening the refrigerator and just pulling out. I don't use recipes. So this was a total adventure for me. So I think that maybe that's contributing, that it just like I'm not in an environment that's warm enough.
What does your bread look like before you score it and put it in? If you
It
want to
looks like it
define
doesn't feel like what it looks like. It doesn't even really rise. Like once I, mix it up by hand and I do the whole thing with the rice flour and the towel and I put it in a bag, and my bag isn't sealing it as much as your bag did. So maybe I need a bigger bag to seal with. And when I take it out, even like 6 hours, 7 hours, it just doesn't really look like it has done much of a rise at all. And then once it goes in the oven, it doesn't rise. And I'm not complaining. I mean, it still tastes good, and I know it's
Yeah.
not, but it sure doesn't look like anything I've ever seen anybody else make.
I think I have an answer for you.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear your feedback,
Sure.
what you experience. You should see a much airier loaf. You should see at least a 40 to 50% rise. So remember when I took this out,
Yep.
it
Yep.
was pretty flat.
Yes.
This just needs more time. And
Yep.
when I checked it about 2 hours before we started the class, it looked that. So I didn't turn on the oven, but I turned on the oven light. I still have an incandescent light bulb in there. So when I
Okay.
turn on the light, it heats a little bit the inside of the oven. You don't want to just turn it on. And I had it in there until just before I heated up the oven. And I thought it did enough, but it didn't. So maybe it was 72, 71. It was pretty cold this morning. I think, well, I know this bread needs a lot more rise time. I would say extend your rise time until you see that it's airy.
Like one time I let it go 8 hours and it still didn't
It
rise.
could even be 10 hours. The
Oh,
colder
okay.
it is, the longer it will take to
Well,
rise.
maybe I should try turning the light on in the oven. You've given great recommendations. And so if anybody hasn't been taking a full like class with you, I just want to say you are like absolutely, completely awesome. You answer questions, you problem solve. And the only reason I'm not joining right up is one, I'm going to be traveling a lot and I don't bake a lot. I just like these breads. Like I don't want to get in the habit of baking. It's just not my passion. But you're just amazing. And I just felt like I needed to say that because you let me unmute for a minute.
Oh,
Sorry.
no, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I love what I do. And one
Yeah.
of the things we'll do is I like to have different breads. The beginner bread that we bake together is great, but there is so much more to come. We are making a fitness bread in a couple months that has no starch, but it's a combination of a few other flours with seeds. We'll talk about inclusions, like for Thanksgiving, we are making cranberry walnut bread. We're having the roasted garlic and rosemary bread. I mean, so many things, because after a while, I want something different. And the single flour bread was born out of the need to have something different and at
Yeah.
the same time make it easy.
Well, I'm going to try. I'm excited to try this. I'm going to order the buckwheat and turn my oven light on. But like I said, I think some of it is my house is just it's
Yeah.
never warm.
And
You
I
know, I
wouldn't be
put it on with
surprised.
lights on overnight and, under a lamp, but I just don't think it ever gets warm enough
Yeah.
to do what it
Try
needs.
the oven.
Okay.
If you wanted to, they have now come onto the market with a proofing box. I
Oh,
think it's a Bread and Taylor, I think is the company.
hmm.
This is literally a box that you can set the temperature and you can proof your bread in or
Oh,
make your starter rise. I think with the idea that a lot of people's houses in the winter just get cold.
yeah.
So your bread could take 10, 12 hours to
Oh,
rise where it is right now. Feel the dough. If you remember what I showed you when we baked together live, it was
yep.
airy. It was almost like a mousse. Not
Yep.
quite, then it's overproof. But you want to see some activity in the dough.
Okay. Like this dough is just heavy. I'm also going to go back to the xanthan and go back to square zero with xanthan and buckwheat and see if I can get a rise.
Yeah, this
And I'll
bread
put
in
it up.
general is going to be a little denser. Let me show you. Just to get an understanding of brands too, why I stress the brand. This is a light buckwheat. I'm sorry, actually, this is teff. I forgot to tell you, you can do that with teff.
Wow.
This is an ivory teff. This is a different brand, brown teff.
Hmm.
Look at the difference of those two breads.
Wow. Hmm.
Different rise, different crumb. This one is a little bit more open, but didn't rise at all. This, I got a better rise, but it's closer together. So when you bake something and it doesn't come out the way it should be, it's usually the brand of flour that you're using. It's not necessarily your skills.
Oh, huh.
Sometimes it's the recipe, sometimes it's simply the brand.
And the other thing that I just wanted to share, because there's several of us that you gave me a hint that was really awesome. If it was brown, like getting too dark in the bottom, to put baking tray on your wire rack. So
Right.
that was super helpful.
Yeah. And you may not need to do that with this bread.
Okay, I'm psyched to try it. I'm gonna order it.
Yeah,
I mean,
let
just
me
the thought that
know.
you can make this with one flour is amazing. And my last question, sorry, then I'll mute myself. Are you going to allow people to join in at different points in the class, or is it join now, or you can't get in
No,
for
the doors are open. We were going
Okay.
back and forth. All the experts say, open your door, close your door. I'm
Mhm.
sorry. In my life, my door has always been open. This is a reflection of who I am. The door is open. We
Mhm.
will have a new cohort starting in October. I don't think we've settled on a date yet, Heidi, when we actually go as a group to create a starter, because some people don't have a starter, or they don't feel comfortable with their starter. It's not performing right. We are taking a group of people through the starter process. I'll make another one as if I don't have one, so I'll create a starter alongside with everybody else. And then we'll have other classes, so you can come in at any time.
And do you always feed your starter when it's warm?
No,
Like
I
not
feed
right out of the
right out of
fridge?
the refrigerator.
You do it right out of the fridge. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I saw some other questions
Thank
pop
you.
up.
I'm going to mute myself.
Oh, you're very
Yeah, so
welcome.
Emily asked, do we keep our starter using rice flour if that's how we start? I don't really understand the question, Emily.
Okay.
Can you unmute yourself?
You want to keep with one. Okay,
I see.
actually, I'm gonna give you a chance to speak and then I'll answer. How is that?
Sorry, well tried.
Okay, now, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Okay, I asked that question because I'm totally new at gluten-free, and I have a rice gluten-free starter that I mixed up. But yesterday I was going to bake, and I added my gluten-free flour to it and wasn't able to. And then I thought maybe I really goofed on that if I added the wrong flour to the starter. Should the starter be kept like it is, like rice flour, or
Okay,
one of the lighter flours or whatever?
it's a very good
It's a
question.
very good question.
And here's what's actually happening. And I'm gonna geek out for a second. The microbes that are in a starter come from different places. We always talk about the microbes in the air, but there are also microbes on the flour. There are microbes on your hand. So some of you have, I think, Agnes or Hildegard. Your version of Hildegard or Agnes is going to be very different than the one that I have in my fridge, because it has been living in your environment. So starter starts to morph depending where it is. And it depends on the brand and the type of flour and the grain, because the outside of a grain has microbes. So they get activated at the same time as the ones in the air. What does that mean? Each flour has a almost unique set of microbes. To keep a starter healthy, you want to continue to feed with the same flour. However, there are ways you can transition into it. And it's a little bit more involved of an answer how to transition from one flour to the other and not kill your starter. Maybe that's a topic for a class, but you want to stay with that one type of flour. Now, if you add something else, see how it goes, go back to the original flour, keep feeding it, and hopefully everything is fine. You're welcome.
Okay, so then another question was, will the taste of this bread, how will the taste be compared to the OG sourdough recipe that you have taught in the past?
It has more earthiness because of teff or buckwheat. They have more of an earthy flavor. The coriander adds a little bit more of earthiness, but also this lightness of, I don't want to say anise because it's not an anise flavor, but it has this unique coriander flavor. You can leave it out. You don't need to add to it, add it to the dough. I think it's a great enhancement. Try it. It's super easy to make. It is denser. It works well with cold cuts and cheese or a hearty soup. to me, it's more of a winter bread or a fill-in. I still like the original. I like some of the other recipes that I've been teaching in classes that are coming in the community. They all are different. See how you like it.
And then can you add other add-ins besides the coriander with this loaf?
Because it is so stripped down, where we don't use any oils, where we don't use any starch, you have to be careful not to upset the balance of the recipe. So as long as it's an herb or a spice that is dry, that's in a small amount, you're okay. This would not be the bread to start adding nuts or dried fruit or something like that. For that, you have to account. We'll talk about that when we do inclusions, talk about the different types of inclusions and how to adjust a recipe to actually, yeah, make it bespoke, make it like the way you want it.
Bespoke bread. Is there anything more amazing than bespoke bread? That just sounds, yes, please, more.
Hey, as I said, there's no reason to eat cardboard and grass when you have to be gluten-free.
Exactly. I'm gonna just plop this link back in here again because it got lost in all the amazing questions you all were asking. You can feel free to go there and explore more and learn more. And you'll be receiving an email with the replay that will give you all the information again, and you can catch up on the replay. And then there was one other question from Lisa. Walter, I think you mentioned you were going to school us on lacking a new, or maybe making a new starter. Please, mine smells okay, but.
Yes. So when you go to the website, if you follow the link that Heidi just put in, it gives you an overview of what the lab is. It's an extension of all the classes. I mean, every class, every person that has been working with me and has, helped me understand what people want, what people need, is it baked into the class. I almost wanted to say into the school. So in there, we have two options. We have an option for people that want to redo their starter. And we have an option for people that say, hey, I have a starter. I'm happy with my starter. I don't need to relearn all the stuff. I just want to be in community and I want to up level my skill. The difference, $16 one time. So you come in, it's $33 for 2 recipes, for the classes, for the community, everything that I quickly showed you, and I'd be happy to bring that up again if you want to see it. $33 a month. That's actually less than what it costs to go into an online class with me, but I want to make it available and accessible to as many people as possible, because I love teaching in community. I love to share all the new stuff. It doesn't serve anybody if it's sitting on my hard drive. So that's one option. If you are here and you said, I don't know if my starter is really well, if it's structured right, whatever, the first time you click join, it adds $16. You get access to this whole starter course. And we will be going through the starter course as a community in October for everybody that has come in through the starter course. So I think one is called the Community Plus Starter, and one is called just the Community. It's all the way at the bottom of the page. Actually, let me bring it up. This is what the screen looks like. At the tab Gluten-free Sourdough Lab is a description of what the community is, the baking community. It tells you a little bit about my vision, my goal of doing this in a community. Here are some of the recipes and things that we'll be making. I have months and months and months of things planned out. You have some testimonials from people that have been through this before, a little bit more about who I am, the topics that we'll talk about. This is a screenshot of the community again. And then all the way at the bottom, it's really cool how the platform has set it up. So as soon as you go in and you hit the button to join, it immediately opens up the community, you set up your profile, and you're right there. You can write start. So if I go in, I click on the option with the starter and community, this is what you will see. You will see a description of what it is. It obviously it's recognizing me, so it knows that I have an account in the community, but you set it up, and then today you would do the $16 extra, that's the 49, and then going forward every month, as long as you want to stay in, it's $33. And to keep it really simple, you can cancel at any time. So it's not like some of the memberships that I have been part of, you have to reach out to the host and you kind of have to beg them to let you out. No, if you say, hey, I've learned enough, it's been nice, click and you can opt out. So that's, yeah, we wanted to make it as super simple and straightforward as we can. Well, I hope to see you on the other side and we get to bake together. We will be sending out the replay, and feel free to send me pictures, let me know how you're doing, and just really, really appreciate that you took the time to be here, and hopefully you'll enjoy the bread as well.